This interview is with James Bartley, and he is a well-known researcher in the UFOlogy community and really highly regarded in terms of researching phenomena with reptilians and other sorts of ETs. And I just wanted to thank him for participating in this interview. Enjoy. So, thank you, James, for agreeing for the interview today. And you're a well-known speaker, I guess, in the UFOlogy community. So it's really great to have you talking with me, because I've been researching a lot about UFOlogy, and I guess I'm really interested in this topic because I feel that there is a lot of fear about this, and it's quite difficult to communicate with people about these things, like within daily communications, I guess. And it's good, that you're doing this sort of research. And I guess people are a bit more open-minded these days, but it's great to have someone that knows a lot about it and has so many experiences and in-depth knowledge. So I'm really excited to talk to you today. And thank you for agreeing again.
Oh, it's quite all right. It's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me to come on.
Okay, that's good. So I did want to start off with just asking you about yourself and how you got into all this UFOlogy sort of topics, and how you found yourself in the field, I guess.
I've always had an interest in the subject. I've read about it a lot as a young boy, just because I'm interested in all things that would be regarded as unusual, the Bermuda Triangle, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, other dimensions. I read a lot about demonology when I was a young boy, what the old scriptures from the Latin. I don't read Latin, but a lot of the stuff translated from the Latin about demonology and whatnot. So I was always interested. Plus, I had my own sightings. I've seen UFOs on a number of occasions up close, and I now know, with the benefit of hindsight and having done a lot of research and spoken and networked with others who had ET experiences, that I've had ET experiences myself. This didn't become apparent to me till 1990, when I had a series of UFO ET experiences, culminating in a fully conscious ET abduction experience when I woke up and I found 3 reptilian greys in my bedroom, and then they took me up into the ship, and then things kind of unraveled from there. And that was the catalyst. That happened September 1990, whereas in the past, up to that point, I just had an interest in the subject, not an all-consuming interest, not an all-consuming passion. After I had that abduction experience, as a way to help regain some degree of control, to help get over the fear, I just immersed myself in the research, and I studied and read every UFO book I could find. And over time, then I relocated to San Diego. Prior to that, I lived in San Jose, California, which in UFO research terms was a backwater. I don't know about now, but back then, just didn't find many people that researched it at a serious level. And it was only when I moved to San Diego in the early 1990s that I met other like-minded people and began networking with others throughout the country, throughout America. And that's how I got into all this, by studying, and also the experiences continued. By that point, I knew I was an alien abductee and had ET encounters, so the experiences continued intermittently through cycles. But by then, I had a support network. I had friends, I had colleagues that I could share, unburden myself with. So that's pretty much how I got into it. It was a way to regain control. It was a way to gain better understanding, to replace the fear and the trepidation with understanding and with heightened awareness. And thankfully, during that process, I met people that become formative influences in my life, people like Eve Lorgan, Barbara Bartlett, Dr. Carla Turner, they really helped me gain a better understanding, and I got to know others similar to myself and similar experiences, and we formed a network on the phone, and we formed a network when the internet was first coming out. We would email each other, share our experiences, share our dreams. So that's pretty much how I got into all this.
Ah, I see. So before the memory of the conscious abduction that you had with the reptilians, do you think that you had experiences that were maybe wiped out or that you're not consciously aware of? Or do you think the interest was just something that you felt called to? Or do you think it was maybe related to?
Yes, now I know that I had experiences when I was younger. I used to wake up with a lot of nosebleeds. I had missing time experiences. And there were a couple of occasions when I consciously remembered being floated up and pulled through my ceiling. The onset of an alien abduction experience. But, you wake up the next morning, oh, what was that happened? Or it was a crazy dream, or you forget all about it, right? At least momentarily. So it was only after I had that series of experiences in 1990 that I sat down and I wrote out as many experiences and unusual experiences and dreams that I can remember. Because by that point, I realized that dreams played a key role in understanding the ET encounter phenomena. That a lot of times, the ETs would visit us in our dreams, what we call stage-managed dreams, or we would have flashbacks or previously unremembered experiences come forth in our dreams. So I began to take note and and I wrote down as many of the important ET dreams that I can remember. And my ET dreams go back to childhood, really. I've had many dreams of ET invasions, UFO landings, and I've had dreams of Sasquatch, big hairy creatures coming out of flying saucers. That was in the mid-1970s. So yes, this had been with me all my life. I just didn't realize that until 1990.
Ah, I see. That's interesting because you brought up nosebleeds. I also had some in my childhood. I wonder if it's related somehow because I feel like I might have had some experience, but I really don't consciously remember anything. But I do feel just some sort of presence around.
Yeah, that's how it usually or sometimes manifests itself, with this feeling of being watched, and this feeling, it's been described as a prodromal feeling of being under observation, of a creepy feeling of something watching you, something not necessarily human, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and also, it manifests in phobias like fear of the dark or fear of a certain room or fear of a closet, these phobias, and they can vary. It can be phobias, fears of clowns, fears of creatures or animals with big eyes, experiencing what seem to be ghostly phenomena, right? So, yeah, there's just a number of different ways that this experience presents itself in the conscious and the subconscious of the individuals involved.
Yes. And how do you think I mean, I know you had that conscious memory now, but I mean, what's the best way in confronting these issues, do you think, if you have a feeling or if, I mean, obviously it's hard to release the fear when you're researching and you don't know what to expect really, but what do you think there are anything, like any practical things that someone could do just to overcome all this fear, I guess, they would feel about it?
Well, in my case, because I didn't have anyone to talk to originally, I was in a backwater like San Jose, California.
Yeah.
Whenever I brought the subject up, my friends would laugh, right?
Yeah.
So I had no one really to talk to about it. So all I could really do was immerse myself in the study.
Yeah.
Read every book about alien abductions, read every book about UFOs, and because I've always had a keen interest in military operations, I soon found out that there's been, and I already knew there was a long-standing connection between the military on the one hand and the government and the corporations on the one hand, and the study and analysis of UFO reports and the study and analysis of actual recovered alien technology. When I realized that deep black elements of the military and the aerospace community for decades, going back 70 plus years now, have had actual hardware, actual hands-on alien technology, as well as the bodies of dead aliens, then that took my understanding to another level. That told me that, okay, they've known about this for a long time, they're keeping it secret, they've got all these cover stories, they ridicule witnesses, and they have professional debunkers try to dismiss everything so as to allay public interest in the subject. But in reality, there is a deep and abiding interest on the part of the military, the government, and the aerospace corporations and the major electronic firms and industrial firms, deeply interested in alien technology. So when I realized that took my understanding to another level, because I read a lot of books and I read a lot of the status reports by Leonard Stringfield. He was he's passed away. He was one of the greats in UFO research. He was an Air Force intelligence officer in World War II. He served in New Guinea and the Philippines with the 5th Air Force of the U.S. And he made it a life study of crash retrievals. That is, alien spacecraft that crash, and then the military recover the crash, and they bring the wreckage and the bodies, living and dead, to various military installations. When I realized that they had done this on a number of occasions, that on many occasions they had recovered crashed alien spacecraft, then that took my level of understanding to entirely another level. That told me that they have this technology, they're using it operationally. It's not just study and research, it's actual operational, utilizing the technology for operations now. And that took it to another level. And then, of course, Bob Lazar, when he came forward, 1989, 1990 time frame, that took it to another level as well.
Right, okay. So, I mean, I guess all this research solidified your experience, so you could at least back up something about your own beliefs and what had happened to you. So, but it is a bit of a scary dark hole to go through, especially if a lot of people don't understand or judge you, and you have nowhere to turn to, which is kind of where I'm at, because if you do look at these subjects, there's not many people that understand what the military are doing, because they understand on the surface level, obviously, the military is not serving much of our purpose as a whole.
No,
I mean,
not at all.
When you look at these really underlying issues as well, it's hard to relay, like you said, to other people, the very alien and I guess esoteric kind of reality that it is, because society and there's so many debunkers and stuff like that, like you said, like teaching us not to look in these dark holes, and the more that you realize it and you experience it yourself as well, it doesn't get easier, does it? I don't feel, anyway. It's like it just keeps going on and on and on.
Yeah, the hole gets deeper and deeper. Now, because I have this interest in the military history, and because I work for the military intelligence community, by studying the military ET connection, it kind of made it more real for me. I mean, I already knew it was real because I had the experiences, but when I realized that there's this back engineering effort, the military and the aerospace corporations are test flying these things, they're developing technology out of it, And then that was the starting point. So later, as I delved into more esoteric aspects, when I started to study the hidden history, the forbidden archaeology, if you will, when I began to study the ancient Chumedian, i.e. ancient Egyptian cosmology, the Neters, the Netarites, the gods, the goddesses, the Enid pantheon, all that stuff, when I realized that they're really talking about aliens.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Sumerians and the Babylonians, and then the Native American aspect to it. They're all talking from their own cultural perspective, essentially about the same thing, that these super beings, who oftentimes presented themselves as gods, they basically ruled the earth. And another key book I read, which really helped my understanding, was Gods of Eden by William Bramley. Because William Bramley pointed out that this alien UFO element was woven like a tapestry throughout human history, that often as not, whenever there were some key turning points, key milestones in the recorded history of humanity, at that same time period, there were all these UFO sightings, there were all these wonders and things in the skies that people were seeing. And so the military understanding formed the template, the background, as well as my own experience. And then I was able to go deeper, study the esoteric history, study the ancient forbidden history, and that takes us to all kinds of different levels. So understanding of the plasma electric universe, understanding of the celestially driven cataclysms that periodically, between 9 and 12,000 years, Earth and the whole solar system goes through a massive upheaval. It serves as a reset, essentially. And a lot of the ancient wisdom of the past gets subsumed, it gets covered over, because the land masses, everything gets moved around, everything gets destroyed, ocean levels rise, so civilizations disappear. And the powers that be, who really are aliens working through their human hybrid plantation managers, they don't want us to know about an ancient golden age, very ancient golden age, when we had all this technology, all these abilities, all this metaphysical, esoteric knowledge. They don't want us to know any of that. So when one really delves into the research, they see that it's all connected, all connected. And that was the lesson I got from William Bramley's book, Gods of Eden, that the ET UFO phenomenon is the basis for everything that we understand in our world, of the controlling religions, of the incessant warfare, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, that's how they can manipulate us from other levels, I guess, because
Yes.
yeah, and the more that we deny those levels of existence, the more that they can utilize their power within that system, I guess. And then, yeah, I guess that's how societies have been running lately. And I don't know for how long, but I have been researching as well. And I did notice that a lot of ancient civilizations, like you said, had the forsaken knowledge about all these things, and also they all kind of run through with the beliefs of the gods and the alien entities and the worshipping, I guess. And I mean, it is all connected for sure. Like if I look in, I know in Hinduism, I guess they have like a lot of deities as well. And
yes,
yeah, a lot of them do kind of look, like ETs, with the blue skin and
the
stuff.
blue skin, they fly around in the sky in chariots and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, some of the Eastern knowledge and traditions, and also like Native American and some of the, obviously the original people of Australia as well, they all have very similar beliefs in the dream time, or however you want to call it. They're all essentially the same, I guess. Those astral levels, or higher levels of consciousness, where we reside. Usually our spirits reside. and that's where they can kind of hijack some of our soul aspects. I mean, they can't really control fully all of what we do, but they heavily influence like our fears, I guess. And that's where, I mean, I've noticed that's where people are unconscious of what they're actually fearing, because like through my own processing of where this stems from, I do see it run within other people as well. So the more that I face my own fears, I've resolved them and I move on, and I'm able to help others as well with this kind of stuff. So, I mean, I do think that people can come out of all of this confusion and muck that they've tried to create here, but it's a very personal journey. So yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but I think.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. It's a very personal journey, and the process that I describe works for me. It may not necessarily work for everyone else.
Yeah.
You know, the intense study, the reading, because it was a way to alleviate the fear. I would try as much as possible to replace the uncertainty, the fear, the anxiety with understanding. And like I said, some key moments for me occurred when I got to know some very important people, like Eve Lorgan and others that who became close colleagues of mine. So I had someone to talk to, and I really feel for people who don't have that means to just reach out and talk to somebody about these experiences, talk to somebody who has a heightened state of awareness about these issues. Through having had their own experiences, through networking with others and doing the research. It's important. One of the things that I would encourage everybody who is serious about this subject of understanding about ETs, UFOs, is to immerse yourself in the research. Because what I've seen, Rose, and this is probably the case the last 20 some odd years, is I just don't find many people nowadays who are real students of the subject, people who are familiar with a lot of landmark cases over the years, the really big, important cases, and the not so big, somewhat more obscure cases, but they're still very relevant, still very important. I just don't find many people that are very conversant with the history of UFO research, and they're not aware of people like Charles Hickson or Herb Shermer or Lonnie Zamora, all these different people that have had ET encounters, even if it was just a one-off experience. Like Lonnie Zamora was a police officer, a patrolman that worked with the state of New Mexico. He saw in broad daylight a landed craft and two ETs out of the craft. And then there was actual trace landing elements involved, little bits of metal that were left behind, charred rock and charred earth, and landing impressions. I mean, that is a classic case that the CIA and other government agencies did everything they could to suppress the truth about that. And that's just one example. But people today that get into all this, rather than taking the time to find these books, to read the books cover to cover, I feel that they take the path of least resistance, which is basically go on the internet, go on to YouTube, just listen to podcasts, watch interviews.
I mean,
but they're not providing themselves a template. They're not providing themselves a background with which to develop their own understanding.
Yeah. I agree with that. I mean, I have been there. I had listened to a lot of podcasts and I had researched online, but I had also done a little bit of research as well. Like I had read Eve Lorgan's book, and I mean, I haven't delved in a lot, but I do have like a massive interest in it, and I understand where you're coming from because you're a person that has done the full research and you understand exactly what's going on. So obviously, if you know like most of the entirety, then it should be frustrating when you see people just make assumptions based on like one YouTube clip or something someone said passively, or like it's hard to really make a judgment of something on the surface level when these topics are very, very deep and ingrained into our beings, I guess, and we still don't even know our human origins. So how do we expect to really understand anything else? So it is vastly complicated, but it doesn't mean that we can still learn from what we're experiencing and from other people. Definitely not. But I think it's a path. It's just you have to take it as it is, and then do the best you can every time. So. Yeah.
And practice. People need to practice a lot of discernment too.
Yes.
That's important. It's one thing for someone to have an interesting story. There's an entertainment value to it. That's all well and good if someone wants to be entertained. If someone has what I call a hobby level commitment to it, they're just interested in interesting stories.
Yeah.
And whether it's about ETs, whether it's about the Kardashians, I don't mean to reduce it to the level of absurdity. It's a very serious subject. But some people just have like a hobby level commitment to it. They don't have a passion for it.
Yeah.
And so it's relatively easy for people like that to get lost amidst all these conflicting viewpoints, because the information that's being put out is it's very subjective.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it has to do with the perspective and the biases, and quite frankly, in many cases, the programming and mind control.
Yes.
That they've been subjected to mind control by the ETs, which is far more effective than the mind control by human agencies, if one were to ask me, because it's much more subtle and much more refined. So if one takes the time to do their own research and read and study the ancient texts and study what the first world peoples have said about the star visitors, then they can begin to form an understanding. And like, for example, if one were to go to my website, thecosmicswitchboard.com, you will find interviews there, like, for example, Jim Goodall, who's written like 38 different books about the stealth fighter, the stealth bomber, about submarines. He is a world-class expert on classified military technology that we're aware of. And he developed sources in places like Area 51. This is going back to the 80s, who told him that ET technology was being test flown, that ET technology was being back engineered, that they've actually got bases on Mars. He was told this in the 80s, long before you hear all these stories about Mars trips and being regressed 20 years back and all this other stuff. And coming from a source like Jim Goodall, who's developed. And to be sure, he has to keep these people maintain their confidentiality. I mean, he could threaten. Lives are at stake, careers, livelihoods are at stake.
Yeah.
So he does his part by maintaining their confidentiality, but he's able to convey the gist of what they're telling him, and that is that in places like the Nevada test site, they have been working on alien technology. They have developed technology, back engineered the technology. It's operational now. They have their own fleets of craft based on alien technology, and they've developed a program and a base or bases on Mars and probably elsewhere in the solar system. So, see, when I hear a story like that from someone like Jim Goodall, who has developed those sources in the aerospace community, in the military, at Area 51, that to me has much more impact than hearing all these stories of people with their super soldier stories and all their stories about being like this, like Marvel Comics superhero, right? Yeah. I mean, it has much more impact to me. It has much more reality to me. It's more grounding to me, right? Because then what we could do is we could go, well, if that's what they've been doing, is what these real insider sources have been saying since the 1980s and early 1990s, one can only imagine the capabilities that they've developed since then. Like Jim Goodall was told by Ben Rich, the former director of the Lockheed Skunk Works, we are working on things 50 years beyond your comprehension. He didn't say 50 years beyond your understanding of aviation, 50 years beyond your understanding of engineering. No, he said, we're working on things 50 years beyond your level of comprehension. Okay? So that the sky's the limit there.
Yeah.
So, then what we can do is we can just go within, we can intuit, we can do more research, and we don't have to get all distracted by all this other stuff that's going on. And I feel that, Rose, that there's a lot of distractions out there. It's very important for people to stay grounded. Whenever there's a high emotional component to something, that's a red flag, right? Because anything of a high emotional nature is meant to influence us one way or the other. What we should do is stay grounded, stay embodied, and let our internal compass, our internal navigation, help us through and help us discern what is important. There's a lot of things out there that are real. I just don't have, I don't feel a connection to them. I'm not going to be distracted by things that, although they may be very real and important to other people, it's not going to suit my purposes. It's not going to help me on my journey if I spin my wheels and get caught up in someone else's experiences. The experiences that don't have any relevance to what I'm going through, relevance to what the information that I need, right? So people have to make up their own mind. They have to become their own best intelligence analysts. We all have to develop our own sources. We have to have our own intelligence requirements, what's important to us, and, just really practice discernment. I can't say that enough.
Yeah, that's totally true. I understood that through my own experience as well, because you can get really caught up in anything, like you said, and then the emotional investment. I mean, on the surface level, it consumes us, but then also, on the other levels, I mean, as you probably know, like, these entities are very willing to harvest our emotions and our attachments. So you have to be very careful with what you agree to partake in, I guess, because just by giving your emotions away, you are giving yourself away, essentially. So it does, you do need to have some boundaries, I think. And
we are emotional beings. That is one of the things that make us unique, that make us special, that make us potentially powerful. But if we allow our emotions to be played, and then what happens is, Rose, we become emotional addicts. We become emotional holics, if that's a word.
Yeah.
Where, it's a way of getting us disembodied, get us in our headspace on the one hand, and get our heart chakra and our heart center all misaligned. So we're getting just buffeted about by all these conflicting emotions, feelings, whatever the flavor of the month is, we get caught up in it instead of staying embodied and using our heart center as our own internal navigator. So, and that's why over the years I've made an effort of talking about some of these negative ETs. Now, I've had positive ET experiences, a number of them actually, and I've had interactions with, if not 100% sure that they're positive, at least at that moment in time, or that moment they were interacting with me at different levels, that they were at least benign, and they didn't mess with me, right? They didn't mess around with my free will, and as far as I know, they didn't do anything to manipulate my behavior, my thinking, my destiny. Because the really negative beings, they can appear as quote-unquote angels of light. They can appear as positive beings. They can use their technology and the ability to manipulate electromagnetic frequencies, their ability to manipulate the human endocrinary system and human neurology to give the person experiencing having the encounter with them this really all-consuming buzz, like, whoa, I've just had this rush and I'm feeling really good. It's a state of nirvana, and it's almost like a love drug feeling. But again, it's when our emotions are played to that level, and we start making all these positive new agey sounds all the time, and where there's no grounding, there's no basis for any of that, right? Because if you come across a lot of these people that are out of whack and out of balance and heavily tilted towards the new age,
Yeah.
And then I listen to them and I feel their vibe, and I know they've had negative, traumatic ET experiences. I can see it in their eyes. I can feel in their vibe.
Mm-hmm.
There's a disconnect there. There's a discordance at work.
Yeah.
What's going on internally compared to what they're professing, what they're speaking, what they're believing, right? And so that's something that they're going to have to work out. And you look in the field today,
Yeah.
there's so many people that are these New Agers. They just get turned off when you talk about anything to do with real alien abductions. In fact, some of them can be quite spiteful and venomous, and they're supposed to be love and lighters, Rose.
Yeah.
But they're bring up some of these subjects, the claws come out and the scales manifest. But and some of them are very into shaming. They shame people. Oh, talking about these negative experiences. It's only because you're spiritually unevolved. That's shaming behavior. That's bullying behavior.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to be spiritually enlightened. So there's a complete disconnect from what they're saying and their behaviors and what they're really doing. Because what I want to do, Rose, is point out, okay, that these things happen. Alien abductions are real. And they can be quite traumatic. And the trauma can lay beneath the surface, be latent for decades, for a whole lifetime. And certain triggers cause them to manifest. And this will cause problems in some cases, in many cases, in interpersonal relationships, trust issues, phobias, lack of belief in oneself. And these are all very basic things. One doesn't need a psychology degree to understand the relationship between trauma, especially trauma if one is aware at some level that it has to do with alien abductions. And then you have the trauma, but then you have the shame, then you have the fear, then you have the ridicule factor. And so that creates secret-keeping behavior. Then these people will be reluctant to talk about these experiences because they don't want to go through what I did. They don't want to be laughed at by people they thought that were friends in their family.
Yeah.
So it's a double whammy for us. Yeah. And then on top of that, you have all these New Agers shaming everyone, saying you're a spiritual retard. So we need to, those people that do this, and there's a lot of them, they need to be called out for their BS. And they need to stop what they're doing because it's shameful on their own part, and it's bullying behavior, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, I don't think it's right. I think a lot of these New Agers and maybe like these spiritual led paths, some of them have hierarchies within them, and I don't think. Yeah, and it's not right because we're all the same, and why are we competing in the spiritual realm? Like if we're really aligned to ourselves, we would understand the acceptance of one another. We don't have to be, treading on other people's beliefs or other people's experiences. It's really horrible because we're supposed to be understanding, and it doesn't matter what other people have as traumas, whether it be like an abduction or a physical trauma, they're all essentially the same because our emotions are attached to them. So it's really important that we understand or try and understand where people are coming from because, I don't think the way some of the New Agers, they do have a lot of truth in them, but it's like they're not really empowering people. They're kind of taking people's power away from them because they understand some of the truth, which is really sad. Like I don't know why people think that just because they have a half truth they can or maybe they're not doing it intentionally, but it's kind of exploiting other people's just other people, I guess. But I do feel a bit sad about the way some people go about trying to help. Obviously fundamentally everyone is helping each other, whether they be malevolent or benevolent or whatever they're trying to do. If we come from a place from within us where we can accept that, at the very ultimate level, everything is here to help us. But there is obviously the middle ground where a lot of stuff happens. So, I mean, if we are traumatized and we're holding a lot of that emotion inside of us, and it's hard to even accept where we are at, let alone try and help other people. So it's really just, I mean, accepting that everything's a process and not like one person knows everything, because we really shouldn't be like looking for a guru or something, but trying to empower each and every other person within our own experience. I think that helps me, like when I listen to you talk, or when I listen to other people that inspire me, it's not about, like I understand that you're speaking from truth and from love, and like ultimately you're really helping other people come out of this, but also you don't want people to just blindly follow you, and
No, the last thing that I need.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really disempowering for other people. You want them to realize that everything they need is already within themselves, but it helps when other people understand, that's the fundamental thing, because we are all the same species. Why are we like fighting over these hierarchical structures that other entities have created? We need to get rid of this thinking.
Well, there's a lack of empathy on the part of those who assume this air of superiority based on what they perceive to be is their truth. And so if you have a new age type person who only wants to see and talk about positive things and talk about their positive ET experiences, and then they're confronted with someone who says, "Oh, wait a minute, that's not what I experienced," right? I respect you, and I won't judge you for having your beliefs, but that's not what I experienced. Mm-hmm. And then the new ager, cops this attitude, right?
Yeah.
That in itself is, they're what I call matrix sentinels. They're working through programs and sub-programs that have been installed in them, and they definitely, I like how you point out the hierarchies, because you find this a lot in the metaphysical New Age field. It's with so many people, it's like, when you listen to their stories, you try to go tell yourself, okay, you have a story. I don't mean you, Rose, but in the example, you have a story in there somewhere, but you're talking about this ascended master, you're talking about that ascended master, you're talking about all these different guides, right? But I know you're in there somewhere. I know that you have a destiny to fulfill. I know that you're not just like a piece of flotsam and jetsam just being buffeted about by the eddies and tides of life and the currents of life, that there's meaning in your life. But what they do is they get caught up in the hierarchical thinking, and they put themselves way down, down there in the lower rungs of the ladder, and they put all these ascended masters and all these spirit guides and all these gurus above them. Yeah. So that's their filtration process. And so instead of this direct connection with what some describe as source, true organic source, they have to filter it through all these beliefs and perceptions and all these ascended masters. And, to each their own. If that's what they need to do, what they need to do to process and work through these challenges, well, whatever works for them. But that doesn't work for me because, another thing also is, you pointed out in some of the communication we've had, Rose, there is definitely an energetic harvesting aspect to this. And we talked earlier in this discussion about having our emotions wrung out. And anytime, even on the surface level, Rose, as you know, whenever the media is all parroting the same message of a high emotional content, and usually has to do with fear, usually has to do with fear or demonizing a particular demographic in society, usually people who don't want to go along with the program, right? For one reason or another, one subject or another. Yeah. That's how they engage the emotions of people. It's very effective because it works on a mass consciousness level. So whenever our emotions are being engaged, emotion, energy in motion, there's a harvest at work.
Yes.
And we have to be careful about allowing our life essence, essentially, because it's all coming out of our heart chakra, and so many of us have had to deal with blocked heart chakras because of, wounded, shame-based upbringings and trauma and shame and guilt and all this other stuff that these religions and these institutions foist upon us.
Yeah.
And I happen to believe in reincarnation, so
Yeah.
a lot of these layers and layers and layers of shame and guilt and trauma, it's from lifetimes, not just this life, but it's just layer upon layer upon layer. That's what we've got to slew off. It's a gradual process. So whenever our emotions are being manipulated to be fearful of something, or conversely, the other end of the spectrum, to be constantly in a bliss state, just blissing out all the time, that's not being grounded. We're meant to be embodied. We're meant to be in our physical body and not, our head space way up in the clouds, because we're just thinking constantly of ascension. When we're here, in order to change this paradigm, this is a paradigm, a matrix of control, and what we need is people boots on the ground, embodied, and not working from a standpoint of fear, but recognizing, okay, this is the nature of the multiple threat environment in which we reside. This is what we have to negotiate and work through and around. How do we go about doing that? What are the things that I can do personally, to help me through this process, whether it's dietary, whether it's spiritual life, whether it's exercise. There's a number of things we can do.
Yes.
Things we read, the things we put in our mind, and avoiding the negative. I mean, one of the things you'll notice, Rose, because you're on Facebook as well, is some people out there, they're well-meaning, and I think that there's an element within that wants to reach out, that wants to educate, help people gain a better understanding, but the end result is just an endless stream of fear, an endless stream of more bad news and hopelessness and despair, and that doesn't help the cause of spiritual freedom. What that does is it locks us in a vibratory prison of fear and trepidation and anxiety, and it's all hopelessness, it's all despair, it's not solutions oriented. And the matrix, the system wants that. The system, it thrives on fear. Exactly. Right? So there are a lot of well-meaning people out there, and they're just kind of locked into a frequency. I understand that. But again, just when that comes across my newsfeed, I just tune it out. I just recognize it for what it is and move on.
Yeah, I've been there, so it's good to experience that level of reality. But ultimately, I think it's really, really important that, this is one of the things that I learned from going back to like the traditional values of the original people, because I had,
Yes, I agree.
Because they understand that the outcome needs to be thought of first before, like the why of what we're doing, the intention is really important. And the how is like there's 1,000,001 reasons or beliefs that we can do the how with, but the why and the outcome should really be focused on. So it doesn't really matter. If we have really strong intentions to change, the society or world that we live in today, then we really have to focus on the outcome, but understand the middle point. Like you said, there's so many things that are interfering, that are affecting our societies today. So we need to be armed, and we need to understand what we're facing. We can't just be actioning from the highest point, because it just doesn't make sense. We have to be grounded on earth, and then from that point of view, understanding our intention, then we can do something about it. Because ultimately, we're all trying to create the earth that we want, right? Like, I don't believe, for the most part, humans are loving. They're not these fear-based people that the media try to make us. I mean, obviously we do get stuck sometimes there, but I think everyone has the ability to come out of that, and it's just finding that heart space that you were talking about, which is really important for people to listen to, because I think our conscious thoughts are just too loud sometimes, and we need to listen to that little...
the internal dialogue.
Exactly.
Just incessant monkey chatter, just constant.
Yeah, and it just overrides our our soul, and we need to give time to that. And I find like meditation helps, and you really need to give time to yourself, and write down things, and try and avoid technology as much as you can. Even though you were talking about alien technology, but I believe the technology we use, we don't even really know where it's come from. I mean, and it's affecting our consciousness so much. I just think that if people take a break from it and not get stuck on their phone so much, it's ridiculous how many people just get sucked into that so quickly, and myself included. Like, I mean, it gets really overwhelming. I don't know how I just get entranced by it, but I think we need to just remove ourselves from these things as much as we can and listen to ourselves again, like you were saying, and then we can help other people.
Yes, because when we get all caught up in there's definitely an AI aspect to it as well, Rose.
Yeah.
Because the nature of this matrix is such that rather than provide us with technology that's clean, that's healthy, that doesn't pollute the place, that doesn't make us ill, well, that's not the kind of matrix we're in. We're provided with things that actually will do us harm, that spews out all these emissions, and now they're going to roll out 5G, and it's already rolling out, and that's another level of manipulation and control. It's going to take it to another level, Rose. So it is a frequency war. There's ways things you can do to mitigate the baneful effects of the 5G, whether it's using tensor rings, tensor coils, whether it's orgone, and there's a number of things one can do to make themselves less vulnerable to the 5G. And like you said, we need to become more natural. Like, a lot of people are moving towards just going back to the basic Nokias or phones like it that don't have a smart aspect. They don't have the internet connection. They don't have all these bells and whistles. They just send texts and receive texts, and they make phone calls with them. And I mean, it's interesting, but the covert operatives out there, that's what they use. They don't have phones that are one big tracking device. It's just, they have like a basic Nokia type phone. They have a bunch of SIM cards, and after one use, they discard the SIM card, and then that's how they avoid being tracked, right? Whereas us, society in general, we can't get enough. I've sat there and watched couples, whether it's in a train or whether it's in their own home, and they sit there and they just swipe their phones. They don't even engage in discourse or conversation with one another. So, that's really being in the headspace. So we have to recognize the nature of the multiple threat environment we're in and take all necessary steps, countermeasures, to not allow ourselves to become vulnerable and to become essentially sickened by this environment, this atmosphere which they're creating for us, the chemtrails and everything else. So, I like to look at it. Look, we're systems busters. We came here to wreck this paradigm. We came here to dismantle. We're frequency busters. They somewhere along the line in some other realm somewhere, they said, look, we need volunteers to go to this place called Earth. It's pretty dark. It's getting darker there. And then we need people that are basically real ass kickers, but coming from a heart-centered perspective, to hold frequencies, to anchor higher dimensional frequencies, to spread love and understanding, right? And so, it's not going to take 1 billion people to change this. I really believe that, it'll take far less people to reach a critical mass. And we're already starting to see that. More and more young people are waking up. You go on to YouTube, and there's all these testimonies of, I used to be a social justice warrior. I used to be a cultural Marxist. These are just kids and they've woken up from the brainwashing and the mind control, and they recognize it for what it is. I mean, that's encouraging to me.
Yeah.
And we see this across the board. So, there's a frequency wave. Let's ride it. And, we're not going to get there by being fearful all the time. But at the same time, we're not going to get there by sugarcoating everything and putting this, new age gloss over everything either. We have to, just like an animal in the wild, bros, we have to be, cognizant of the multiple threat environment in which we reside. Animals in the wild, it's like they operate on instinct. They don't ask themselves, what was that sound? What was that scent that I just picked up in the atmosphere? Why did the vibe change? No, if they're an animal that's subject to predation, they just run. They don't think. Thinking is too slow, right? They take corrective action. And what's interesting too, and gabbing a lot here, and I really want to hear your take on this too, is the aerospace firms, the armaments makers, they make all these gadgets and devices, Rose. It's like, for planes and for ships and now for individual soldiers, all these different sensors that tell you if the plane you're in is being tracked by radar and what kind of radar. Is it the kind of radar that locks onto you and where a missile can home in on the radar beam and crash into you, right? All these different sensors that the war making and the armaments firms, they create all these sensors.
Yeah.
We have it within us. And we have every sensor you can ever imagine inside of us.
Yeah.
And, Lockheed and Raytheon, they spend bazillions of taxpayer money making this sensor, that sensor, this radar, that radar, this sensor device. And we've got all of that. It's native to us. If we can just slew off all the shame, slew off all the guilt, which we just absorb lifetime after lifetime, right?
Yeah.
So, that's another object lesson. The Matrix and the Matrix Sentinels have to make all these devices spending untold bazillions of dollars in order to do so. But it's something, all those sensors are something we have innately within us anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
And our sensors work on multiple dimensions and multiple planes of reality too. Go figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you just even have that belief, you start understanding that you do have the perceptions or senses, like you were saying, because we are really like sensitive people, and we've been taught to shame people that are sensitive. It's not. I mean, that's fundamentally who we are, because we do feel, like you said, we're emotional beings, and that's part of the sensory system and how we discern. And especially when you start asking yourself, why do I feel these emotions and what's happening here, and you can find the fundamental beliefs that you have attached to those emotions, you can really discover more about yourself. And you learn more about your surroundings, and just through facing your own shit, basically you help others. You really do. Like, I noticed me, even I faced all these kind of fears that I had just by doing it myself. I had helped so many people around me, like unconsciously probably, but just in the way that I come across, because I have a better understanding of what's happening through my experience, because I've faced what I need to face, and then just aligned myself more, because I don't need to feel disempowered by knowledge and stuff, because there is so much out there. Like when you start researching, or when I started researching this stuff, it really made me fearful about what's happening on Earth. But once you get past the fear and you understand, knowledge is not it's what you do with knowledge that that you have to be careful with. So but that can empower you. So knowledge is knowledge. It's not like good or bad. There's no such thing. So it's just how you use that, and how you manage within your own self, and how you can help others face their own fears as well. So I think a lot of this stuff triggers us, so it's good to listen to why things are triggering you, and just keep working, keep going inside always, and then I guess the outside eventuates what is coming from inside anyway. So I don't believe anything that happens in our life, or however horrific it is. I mean, I know a lot of people go through severe physical trauma, but I do believe they're the strongest people, and they can surpass that. They've been given that path within their life because they can handle it. They're probably the most strongest people out there, but they can handle it. They're alive still, so there's a purpose in that. And once they empower themselves within all that trauma, like you were saying, they can change so much within themselves and around them, I believe. So
I agree. It's the indomitability of the human spirit, and we are the sum of all our parts. Many of us have come here from, whether it's higher dimensions, whether it's some other star systems in our past/parallel incarnations, and we do have counterparts out there a little further ahead of us in the timeline track, and very far ahead of us, as far as the evolutionary track is concerned. Essentially, some of our counterparts are literally ETs, and we're the ones that are stuck in this flat time field effect, which the time frequency seems to be speeding up, which I think is a good thing because it allows us to manifest more. It manifests in a real way. I mean, I like the work that Greg Braden does, talking about the divine matrix. I like what Bruce Lipton talks about, how we can program our cells and our DNA, and I like what that late great Japanese scientist has done with water.
Oh, Dr. Emoto, he's amazing.
It's and then when you look at the human potential, you look at people like Rolling Thunder, and there's a long-awaited documentary coming out about him at some point, but Rolling Thunder was an intertribal medicine man, and he created and manifested all kinds of wonders. I mean, he was able to generate single-handedly tremendous electrical thunderstorms. He was able to call down lightning from the sky. And these weren't parlor tricks. These are just something that in his teachings and what his elders had taught him, passed down throughout, down through the millennia. The object lesson is we could do that too, but do we have the spiritual foundation? Because if there's no spiritual foundation, then we just become a menace to society. It will be like, those X-Men movies where the guy's got superpowers, but he's a bad guy, right? Yeah. So what's the point? Yeah. Maybe he's not going to use it to fix this place. Then, So, you think of people like, if you've ever read the book about the Lakota elder, Black Elk, I think his name was, and there's amazing things that he used to do. And I witnessed, and I've had friends that were in medicine lodges in Pine Ridge, in America, the Lakota reservation, and they've seen all kinds of things in those medicine lodges, sweat lodges, right?
Yeah.
They've seen all kinds of amazing things, but it just speaks to who we are, our multidimensional nature, and that's why this matrix and all of its matrix sentinels go to such trouble to make us shame-based, to make us not trust ourselves. And if you look at a lot of the people in society who have problems in interpersonal relationships, women who keep finding themselves in abusive relationships, it's because they don't trust themselves. Yes. It's because they're so shame-based and they're so lacking in belief in themselves that they just can't pick themselves up and walk out and leave a very toxic, dangerous environment because their self-worth is at such a low level. And see, that's an example. Is like someone who's been so beaten down by the system. And then you talked earlier about these people that have endured horrific trauma, and yet their spirit still shines. They're indomitable spirits. And that's the lesson that I get from the people that have endured a lot of trauma. And I just am humbled and hold these people in awe that they can have endured so much trauma and still be loving people, still be well-adjusted people, still be uplifting, encouraging people. And sadly, there's a lot of people that have endured trauma that they haven't had enough time or haven't really worked through all their challenges and issues, and so they're easily triggered, or they become morose, depressed, or argumentative, whatever the case may be. We're all a work in progress. I am one, certainly. But then I look at the people that have gone through trauma, that I know for a fact they've gone through trauma, horrific trauma, and they still are such wonderful, uplifting, strong people. And that, to me, it gives me hope for the future of the human race. Because if we're not careful, and if enough people, decide, well, things are too far gone, I'm just going to do my own thing, and I'm going to check out, and it's not my problem, right? Then it's quite possible, if not in this timeline, it could branch off into another kind of timeline, a very dark timeline. The human race can potentially be headed off to Borgville, where if survivors are lucky, there's going to be enough of them left just to do all the menial slave labor, but there won't be any emotions, there won't be any feelings. They'll just be half man, half machine, and probably not even able to procreate and reproduce, right?
Yeah.
So, all loaded up with AI and all loaded up with silicon chips or whatever. But if we play our cards right, if we do what each one of us is capable of doing at some level, and by that I don't mean, Rose, being crusaders, because that whole thing of protesting, I understand the importance of petitions, and I understand all that, and there's a place for some of that. But there's a lot of work that can be done behind the scenes. One doesn't necessarily need to be getting a huge following. One doesn't necessarily need to be out there in the public eye and getting a big bullseye stuck under their back. There's a lot of things that can be done sub rosa behind the scenes to change this paradigm. And I like your thoughts on that too, because you've come up with some great questions, and we're probably going to have to do this again sometime if you like, to be able to go through all this stuff,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, I definitely understand what you're saying. So I think, we can always spark change in our everyday life, you're right, because there's just like so many levels of realities that it doesn't really matter where we're coming from, as long as we understand that, it's not just the surface level that's, it's not the only operational thing here, and even if you're not conscious of what's going on other levels, it's enough to just understand that we're not just the physical, and essentially everyone does understand that, because we wouldn't be feeling, heightened emotions or whatever, we wouldn't have sensitivities, I guess, if we were just physical. These are our spiritual tools, I guess, we can use. So it's just good, to show everyday people what they're capable of. So I think that's how we can really change from the grassroots, like from within our own families and friends, within our own areas, just even talking to your neighbor or whatever it is, even a stranger. It's nice to acknowledge that we're all here and we're all human. It doesn't really matter that whatever you think someone's thinking, or whatever you judge them off. We're all experiencing one level or another each other. So I think understanding and awareness is really important.
Yes, because what they strive to do, Rose, is create all these artificial fault lines. They make race an issue. Oh, now they're making gender an issue. Oh, they're making this an issue. Oh, this person won't go along with the program. They're bad parents because they're not doing what the system tells them to do, or they're not going along with this narrative or that narrative, right? Yeah. So it's all about castigating, blaming, demonizing, and what all that does when the mainstream media and academia and all that, when they do all this, it plugs into this primordial element, the R complex part of the brains of all these people. Yes. And it's highly emotional in content. And maybe these people have felt disempowered. Maybe they felt like they've been given, the shaft by society, so to speak, and now they're feeling empowered because their cultural Marxist professors are telling them, okay, here's who your target's at, here's who you need to be mad at, and they're feeling empowered, but it's locking them further into this emotional kind of maelstrom where reason, logic, all that gets left by the wayside, and they're just being energized by base primordial impulses, right? And that's what they want. They want whole hordes of these young Maoists, right? These Maoists, Red Guards, right? And so how does one deal with that? Well, with reason, with reason debate, with logic, by trying to keep everything on an even keel, right? And the message will get to the people who need to hear it. And there's a lot of people that are more receptive now. And what I found out in an interview that's coming out, I think it's already out, I interviewed Matt Ladman, who's one of the top activists as far as exposing the chemtrail agenda, the 5G agenda, et cetera, and he made a very good point, and I agree with him 100%, that you got to meet people at their needs. If you come across someone and they know that, okay, things aren't all they're cracked up to be, there's injustices in society, and there's a lot of imbalance and a lot of inequality going on. I'm not going to blow them out of the water talking about reptilian overlord ships and alien hybrid program, because it's not meeting them at their needs, and that's not talking down to them. It's not dumbing down my conversation in order to make myself understandable to a given person, because sometimes a person they just need a few little seeds to help them develop more clarity on their own. Compared to those who will tend to blow people out of the water. Oh, this 9/11, this 5G, it's depopulation. You're all going to be turned into transhumanist Borgs. People don't need to hear that.
It's too much.
You blow them right out of the water.
Exactly.
So find out where people, and that this is part of the intuitive process, right? Where you meet people at their needs, and you kind of, okay, well, if you want more of the information, there's a good book by this guy, there's a good website, check this out, and then you leave them to figure out on their own. And if they have any more questions, they come back and they ask you, well, I checked out that website, I read that book, pretty interesting, what else do you recommend, right? And then from there, and it's done in such a way that it's mutually beneficial. It's not like, oh, I'm this all-knowing, all-wise guru, right? This person, this humble supplicant is coming to me to learn, right? No, it's not it at all. Because if we allow ourselves the opportunity, Rose, we can learn from anybody. We can learn from the most humblest person. We can learn from somebody living on the street, a homeless person. We can learn from anybody, anything. And as long as we get this ego under control, we can learn a lot.
That's so true. Yeah. I mean, I probably learn the most from the people that I least expected, because, I mean, when you just let go of expectations of what you think is going to happen, then you allow for greater learning, I guess, because you really don't know what you're gonna, what gets given to you or how it's gonna come. So you just allow people to teach you what they need, because everything is a learning experience, definitely.
It is, and what happens is it's a process of remembering and reawakening, because okay, say you meet somebody, and I don't even like to use the term politics because it's so loaded, it's so full of distortion, the whole concept of it. But even someone who, let's say, philosophically may not agree with you on certain surface level things, there's still things you can potentially, if you give yourself the opportunity, you can learn about that person simply by being interested, sincerely interested in that person. What makes that person tick? What are they motivated? What do they like to do for recreation? Or what's their favorite pastimes? You can. So what if the person has like a political ideology that you don't agree with? There's something that we can usually, unless you're dealing with this foaming at the mouth Maoist Red Guard type, but for most people, you can find points of commonality because, again, we're humans going through this physical embodiment phase, right? And so, a lot of these people, a lot of these New Agers, Rose, they want to put the cart before the horse. They want to be up there bouncing their head on the ceiling from ascension and all this other stuff. And they forget that we're here in physical embodiment to anchor higher dimensional frequencies, to uplift, to encourage others, and not to be a source of, despair, of hopelessness, right? We want to be people that when people leave our presence, they leave feeling good about themselves. Wow, that was a really cool guy. He brought up all these interesting things, and he was really interested in what I had to say, and right, or she was really interested in what I had to say. And if we can do that, just plant these seeds everywhere we go, leave people feeling good about themselves, leave them feeling uplifted, where they can turn around and they can go back into their own world, so to speak, and feel good about themselves, at least momentarily. Let them revel in being human. Let them revel in being alive and having hope instead of despair. And see, I never want to be a source of negative for other people, where they go to my lectures and then they go away with a sour taste in their mouth and they're contemplating jumping off a ledge or something because I've given them such despair and hopelessness. That's not what I'm about, right? To be forewarned is to be forearmed, and it's part of the maturation process. It's why we're here. So, I really thank you for letting me come on the show, and we touched and talked about so many things, and I hope I made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You really did. And I understand completely where you're coming from, because you're speaking from your heart, and I do feel like your experience and your knowledge really syncs with my understandings as well. So it's really great to have a conversation with someone like you, because there's not many people that I could have such a conversation with. So it's you've done your job. You've made me feel more lively and empowered. So I think that's a conscious conversation. We're exchanging energy properly, not in a fear-based way. So and
that's important. Leave the listeners with a feeling of hope. Leave them with a feeling that they can make a difference, because we are multidimensional infinity. We operate and we work at many different planes of existence. And that's why they go to such trouble to make us feel so shame-based, and make us feel so powerless, and make us feel like we're less than, when we're not. We are worthy. We're worthy of having happiness. We're worthy of having great relationships. We're worthy of having great friends and great life. Within the context of this matrix system, we can excel in many different ways, and we can also, in the process, see, that's one of the ways that my mentor, Barbara Bartley, told me. She said, one of the ways you get back at the system, with this matrix of control, this soul energetic harvesting that a lot of the negative reptilians and mantis beings and whatnot, the indulgent, is the way you get back at them is just by being joyous, by being happy, by being fulfilled and content. Instead of being a malcontent, to be content, right? And we can always strive to excel, no matter how humble our circumstances, Rose. No matter, I've lived in tiny little matchbox apartments, but you know what? I was happy because I had a phone, I had a computer, I could talk to people like you, right? So, on the outside, it didn't look like much, but at the time, it was home sweet home.
Exactly.
So, it really, it's it starts with the first circle. From the heart center, radiates out. So, I want to thank you for what you're doing too, Rose, because you are making a difference, and I really appreciate that.
Thanks, James. That means a lot to me, because I'm just starting on this adventure. So I would really like to reach out, to more people, but I'm just starting, and I think it's important to remember as well. Your foundational beliefs should be strong enough for you to maneuver through all this negativity and all this information field, I guess, because that's quite important when you're facing so much adversity. So as long as we all remember, we're never alone, and there's always help there. So don't be afraid, I guess.
That's a good point. I'll leave you with this thought until next time too.
Yeah.
Now, I did make the comment. I didn't mean to sound flippant.
No.
But when I talked about how some people, there's so many hierarchies that they deal with, this ascended master and that ascended, that does not obscure the fact that at the higher spiritual realms, we have a huge, huge cheering section for us.
Yeah.
They know that when we come here, we come into this earthly plane and we accept all these limitations, that we no longer have the ability to manifest instantly like we would have in some of these higher dimensional planes, because quite frankly, there's all the shame-based programming and trauma we've endured. The ability to instantaneously manifest may not be a good thing for a lot of people, until they work out a lot of these issues and a lot of these challenges. So the point of relevance is that, yes, there are spirit guides. Yes, there are guardian angels. Yes, there are our extended ET higher dimensional star family, of which we are connected to, that have a vested interest in seeing that we do our job here and we meet the people we're meant to meet, and we have the kind of life and have the kind of impact we're meant to. The greater the struggle, the greater the prize, and adversity only makes us stronger. If we just never give up, if we never ever give up, we'll get to the finish line. We'll get there and we'll make a difference. So again, thank you so much, and let's catch up again soon, Rose.
Yes. Thank you, James. Definitely. We'll do this again soon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night.